I'm going to show you how to make key changes feel effortless. If you've ever found yourself stuck when trying to change keys in your music and you want to make it smooth and feel like it just happened naturally, then I'll show you a method that I find makes it very easy. I've studied music and conducting at places like Cambridge and Yale, and I've run the channel Inside the Score. So I've studied how composers do this, and I'm going to show you my favorite way of doing it. The thing about key changes is they only really work in certain kinds of music, and that's my first big point. Understand the idiom of your music. Different musical styles have different rules and expectations when it comes to key changes. For example, if you listen to Hans Zimmer, Take Time from Inception, you'll notice it naturally stays in one key throughout. And that's because there's this repetitive, hypnotic nature in it, repeating the same 5 or so chords again and again. And that sense of build would be disrupted by frequent key changes. On the other hand, more traditional symphonic music or film music by John Williams or John Powell, in that kind of style, key changes add depth, movement, and emotional complexity to the piece. So before you start trying to shoehorn in key changes, take a moment to identify the style that you're working in. The second thing to think about is to shift your mindset and think beyond chords. This is a crucial step in mastering smooth key changes. Now, when new composers first try to change keys, they often get stuck. And I think often that's because they're thinking in terms of chords. They're thinking chord, and they're asking themselves, what chord progression do I need to use to get from this key to that key? That's how I used to think. I used to try and learn or memorize chord progressions, but that's not the most effective approach. One of the most powerful tools for smooth key changes is something called voice leading. This is the idea that each individual line should have a smooth, logical progression from one note to the next. And when you apply this concept to key changes, that's when you start getting these really natural, fluid key changes. So instead of thinking, what chord comes next, you should think, what's the bass line doing? What are the middle parts doing? What's the top line doing? All of those lines should be treated as having their own individual life, even as they work together. So just remember, don't get bogged down in chords. Think about the movement of individual voices, especially the bass line, and you'll unlock a whole new world of key change possibilities. The third big thing to think about is make your bass an active participant. In traditional symphonic writing, the bass can be a melodic voice in its own right, just as important as any other part in the composition. By giving your bass line a more active role and allowing it to move and lead, you can steer your entire composition towards a new key almost effortlessly. Let me show you what I mean with some examples. So these came from a film score I did about 2 years ago, but it was this funny animation film with this big battle sequence, and I remember in this sequence I changed key, I don't know, so many times, because the stakes of the battle kept getting raised in different ways, and then it would cut to different scenes, cutting between characters or cutting between funny or exciting moments, and so on and so on. And that's what I was using key changes for. So here's a really simple example where we change from B flat minor to F minor. Have a listen to the bass in particular. So that is the simplest example. The bass literally climbs up from B flat to F. And so the bass is leading the way into that key change. Here's another simple example where we go from F minor to C minor in the same kind of way. Again, listen to the bass. You heard how the bass simply climbed up from F to C by going. The bass makes it very easy to change key in that instance. Let's look at something a little more complicated. So here we change from E minor to B flat minor, a full tritone. How? Well, have a listen. So you hear how we went from to by a bass line. The bass was here in E, and then it had its own melody. And there we've arrived at B flat, simply through interesting bass lines. Here's a slightly more advanced example of going from D minor to E minor. So we went from D minor to E minor. And in this case, I'll admit the bass is more atonal, but it's still leading the way completely. If I'd been thinking about this only in terms of chords, I really don't think I would have been able to make that feel natural. And I know that that one is more atonal and 20th century, but it still works fluently as a smooth chord change in this idiom. Now here's another one from C minor to E flat minor. And all throughout, you will hear that the bass is taking charge. So you hear that, where we're in C minor, and then the bass goes. You hear how the bass sort of has its own melody. It's not just the boring old bottom note of the chord. I'll show you one more. So you notice that all the way through this, my bass is an active participant. It's not just holding the bass, it's its melodic line. The horns have that melody and the bass is answering. It's going ba 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 ba. All of my lines have their own life to them. And this is something that used to be more normal in music. And I feel like a lot of modern composers maybe have forgotten this. But this is also what I mean by the idiom of your music matters. I've established my bass as its own living, breathing part early on. And so for the whole track, it's very, very easy for me to change keys. But if all your bass ever does is be the bottom note of your chords, then you'll really struggle to have that sense of harmonic freedom. So I hope you heard how the bass line in each of those examples wasn't simply holding down the fort, but it was actively moving and guiding the music. The bass becomes like a musical GPS navigating the harmonic landscape, and it brings all the other voices along for the ride. That's the power of voice leading in action.